Hello, I am Alfredo Behrens, and this is the first video of actually 8 that I will be using to introduce each one of the sessions on this course on negotiations. During this first one, of course, we will review the matter. It's not the first time that you have negotiated, nor probably the first time that you have had a course on negotiations. So we have to set the agenda for the next. In this session as well, I will introduce one first case that we will not discuss is the creation of a market for mobile phones. This will be very helpful to introduce our second session when we will discuss the organization of a rave and the negotiations that have to be carried out in order to make it a successful rave. And then on the third session, we will discuss the negotiation of fees. Now, of course, everybody is interested in fee negotiations because you one day may be involved in one. But in this case, we will discuss a more complex case. This will be a negotiation of a fee through agents. That is, agents will negotiate for you. And you will break up in pairs and discuss with you as if you were negotiating representing one agent against the other. In the fourth session, we will discuss negotiations against dumping. Now, dumping is terrible, but it happens all the time. Every time that you dump into the environment greenhouse gases, you are doing dumping. And of course, the atmosphere belongs to everybody and it has to be negotiated. But it's not the only case. There is waste being dumped on third world countries as well. So you see, these things have to be negotiated. Some of these negotiations are complex because they involve many countries that have different interests. And we have to spell them out. Then we will discuss the case of mergers and acquisitions. Now, this is a bit of the bread and butter of international negotiations. They might be sparse, but there are quite a few of them, and most of them fail. Why? That is the big question, and negotiation is a significant part of that problem. On the sixth session, we will discuss negotiations amongst mining companies. Now, I have chosen those because they are large, and because they are large, there's a lot of public information about them. So we will discuss the issue of relationship with all stakeholders involved, not only shareholders, but everybody that has a vested interest in the operation. And particularly, we will have to discuss the issues of large corporations operating in the midst of poor populations, like is the case frequently in mining areas where you have native populations. The case of mining will draw our attention to the role of stakeholders, because you will never be negotiating with another person in front of you. This other person will represent many interests behind his corporation. Now, corporations are rather opaque, and it's pretty hard to understand who else is behind the person that you're negotiating with and what their interest may be. This is why I will use international cases of negotiations, because not only there is an ample amount of information about them, but also because it's easier to figure out the interests of the stakeholders affected. And lastly, we will discuss something which is, I believe, very important. Sometimes you want solutions, but you have to take into account the endowment of resources that are available. Some countries have been led into piracy because they were good at sea and there was no more fish to be fished. Others were good at sea, but relative prices induced them to become engaged in drug trade. Or in some other cases, you had agriculturalists that knew how to plant and harvest and irrigate. But it turns out that they make more money out of planting coca leaves than something else. So when you are going to become a negotiator, you have to take into account the endowment of resources as well. Well, let's see. Let's move on. Yes, let's move on. I had announced that I would introduce a case that we will not discuss, but it's good to frame the issue. You may be too young to remember, but there was once upon a time that there were no mobile phones at that market and you had to create it from scratch. Then mobile phones came out of nowhere. Nobody really knew what they were for, nor how they could be used. You could make just about any claim about them. Not that you wanted to lie, but when the market is not very sophisticated, you can make very wild claims. You may be tempted to make any wild claim, but people are not stupid. And they're unlikely to buy the phones unless they know that other people have them, because they would need to call up somebody else. So people are unlikely to either buy your phones or even carry them with them unless they knew that they could call other people that also had a mobile phone. So the more mobile phones around, the more likely is that customers will want to have one. But it was not only necessary for many people to have the phones, but also that they worked. And for that you needed strong signals. That requires a substantial investment. Even today, very close to large cities, it is pretty frequent that you will have blind spots where the signal is either non-existent or too weak to be good enough. The more antennas you planted around the environment, the stronger the signals would be. And people will be pleased and then buy more phones and carry them with them. So you see, that's the problem. If you want people to have mobile phones, they have to be able to call other people, therefore many people will have to have a phone. But the signal will want to be strong enough. And in order for that, you have to make a very substantial initial investment, because people move around and they will want to be able to talk to others even when they are far away. Actually, that was the purpose of it, wasn't it? But if you have invested so much before, you will want to lock your customers in, because you don't want another wise guy to come up and wipe the market off your feet once you've made the initial investment. So you see, when there was no market and you wanted people to have mobile phones, you knew how to make mobile phones, but not necessarily antennas. You had to negotiate that with a supplier. And perhaps you needed to negotiate with a marketing company to make people want to have those phones. And there were many other stakeholders involved in this. The government, of course, to regulate the provision of that very new service. You see, this is a good case that introduces the one that we will discuss in the next session about organizing a rave. You may have a good idea, but you have to negotiate your way through in order to make it real. I just want to help you navigate through my course. There are many sessions, but they all look roughly like this one. This one in particular is session 8. They all start with a video, and they are followed by a PowerPoint. The PowerPoint usually is more extensive, more detailed than the video can be. Sometimes the PowerPoint holds graphs or images that, in video you can't see in the same detail. I also have of course, a reading list. A reading list or a watch list. I strongly encourage you to read that as well, because, I don't know everything that there is to be said. And, books and articles help you a lot. In this particular session, I have also another PowerPoint. I will not usually have 2 PowerPoints in one session, but here I'm using this extra PowerPoint to express people issues that are always involved in negotiations and that are generic to all of them. And of course, there is a quiz. Sometimes the quiz will be multiple choice, otherwise there will be essays. I still have to work my way around it because I don't really know how it works, but there will be, yes, a quiz or something like it. And every couple of sessions we will have a tuition. Thank you. See you soon.